Small. Wow, tiny.
You are currently listening to Tiny Table,
where we explore TTRPGs you might not have heard of.
Whether big or small, we hope to cover them all.
Because we know that great things can come in tiny packages.
Hello and welcome to Tiny Table, where no game is too small. From rules to rolling to review, we teach RPGs so you can play too. And today, I am very excited to introduce our newest interview guest. Please welcome to the show, Mint Rabbit, the author of Protect the Child, our third partnered game. Mint, we are so excited to have you here on the show. We'll do a quick round robin introducing ourselves, our names, and our pronouns, and then we'll pass the mic on over to you so you can introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, I'm Holly, they, she.
Hey, I'm Skylar. He, they, it, all interchangeable.
Hi, I'm Neo, they, him.
And I am, have been, and will continue to be your game mistress, Julie, she, her.
Hi, I go by Mint Rabbit, but I'm also good with Mint, and I use she, her.
Welcome to the show,
to have
Mint.
you.
Thank you.
Yay! Yippee!
Before we dive into our first question, Mint, I would love if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at in the hobby, anything you want to just give as a basic bio breakdown before we dive into our questions.
My name is Mint. I live in Newfoundland, Canada.
Ooh.
I've been designing this game for the past 2.5 years, and I would say that Protect the Child is probably one of my first projects. There's been other things, sprinkled in, but it's the first really big project for me.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. It's a hell of a project.
Yeah, I was gonna say this one has a lot of depth to it, a lot of juice, really stuff to sink your teeth into, a lot to get excited about. So the level of effort I feel is very easily expressed in this.
Yeah, hell of a first game.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll jump into our first question then. Protect the Child uses the Forged in the Dark engine as its core chassis. You've also worked with this engine previously in A Terrible Fate, another game of yours. What inspired you to choose this engine for Protect the Child, and what lessons did you learn while making A Terrible Fate that you've then applied to this game's creation?
So, I actually worked on Terrible Fate after Protect the Child.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's actually kind of reversed, but to be completely honest, both of those games were more inspired by a lot of the other Forge in the Dark games that I've been reading.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself drawn to Forge in the Dark for a number of reasons. First of all, I think it's very apt that you call it an engine because you can take this system apart and you can put it back together, and you don't have to use all of the original pieces if you don't want to, and you can also put some new pieces in there. I found that the phases of play, the run and the downtime, there's this rhythm that allows you to go through a lot of high-paced action and then slow down and do some interpersonal role play and then back into the action again. A lot of the games that I was reading and I think really inspired this game include Slug Blaster by Mikey Ham, Mothlight by Justin Ford, and Brinkwood Blood of Tyrants by Far Horizons Co-op. And that last one, so Brinkwood does definitely more inspire A Terrible Fate than Protect the Child, but what it did for me is that it really broke the playbooks down into the fact that you can break them into different pieces, you can break them in half, you can, take things out, put things in. Because Brinkwood uses masks, which you kind of just slap onto a character sheet. There's also this really neat thing that, just looking at a bunch of different Forge in the Dark games, is that you realize that the crew that exists in Blades, it can be whatever you want it to be, but it's primarily just the reason all of the characters are involved in the same story. And my biggest issue with a lot of the more trad games is that you have to work really hard to get all of the people's different character concepts to fit in the same story, and Forge in the Dark just says, no, here's the why you're working together. We figured that out. You just have to work off of this core concept.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, that's a huge thing, right? When it's like,
you don't have a uniting, motivating goal, suddenly it's like, why are all these Mary Sues hanging out in the first place, sharing the spotlight? But I do have a question. In your answer, you use this phraseology of masks. Is that a specific, game engine term?
So in Brinkwood Blood of Tyrants and also in A Terrible Fate, your character has 2 parts. And the first part is the person that they are. There are usually a few details about maybe their background or their name or maybe an interest they have. But all of the cool shit that they get to do is placed in this separate playbook called a mask, and the masks are interchangeable. So you could play the mask of lies in your first mission, and then pass it off to somebody else and pick up the mask of justice in the second mission. And in A Terrible Fate...
very cool.
In Terrible Fate, this is used to represent the masks of Majora's Mask. And you're a group of adventurers, and you can put on and take off different elemental masks as you work through various dungeons.
That's cool.
Wait, that's sick as hell.
Thanks. I run a blog called There's a TTRPG for that. You might have heard of it.
Yes!
And about 2.5 years ago, somebody asked me on the blog about a game that would replicate Majora's Mask. And I had a couple, half-good answers at the time, but when I was thinking about it, I thought, Brinkwood would be perfect for this, because there was already these masks involved. So it took me a couple of years to kind of really put that out into the world, but when I did, it just all kind of clicked into place.
What would you say in the back and forth between, you began work on Protect the Child, you then started and finished A Terrible Fate, and Protect the Child is itself still in playtesting. In the arc of making and finishing a smaller but still Forged in the Dark game, what were some of the lessons you then brought back into the design for PTC?
That I can take it apart even more. There's more pieces that I can take apart than I thought. Because if you can separate entire pieces of the playbook and then pass them off to another person, what is important for your character, what matters for your character, and what can you pass around. It's less separated in Protect the Child because there's so many pieces in Protect the Child that I think are really important for the character that you step into, especially the character weaknesses. That was something that I don't think exists in a lot of other Forge in the Dark games, but it felt really important to include in Protect the Child. It was very important that your characters have this one thing that's their critical failing when it comes to parenting, and that just kind of defines their entire arc.
That's really cool. And I guess kind of along those lines, because this game is your largest so far, and as we've said, it's had your most involved playtesting process, what has it been like growing your playtest from your home game group to this larger scale Discord fan base? How do you as a creator balance your personal taste with the feedback from the community? Are there any insights from folks in the server that have, drastically or dramatically shifted the game's design?
So I think to answer the first part, I need to separate these into kind of 2 separate answers. I would say that I grew my playtesting pool gradually, and I was very intentional at the pace that I grew it. I started with my home game for the really roughshod, not fit for public version of the game. And then after that, I sent out messages to people who'd been very kind to me as I was just starting up in my TTRPG blog persona. So I managed to put together 3 games with 9 people who I had invited privately. One of them was Thomas Manuel, who then very kindly invited me onto his show to talk about my game. And he gave me a big press boost right around the same time that I started opening my server up to the public, so people knew what the game was about. And then after that, I also jumped into a bunch of one-shot events on various Discord servers in communities that I was part of. And whenever I ran into somebody that I gelled with or I really enjoyed their role-playing, I would send them a personal message and say, hey, I really enjoyed the game that we played together. I would really love it if you could play with me again, and here's this game that I'm working on. And sometimes they would respond and say, oh, that's really interesting, I'll get involved, or I'll take a peek at the Discord server, and that cultivated a small pool of people. And as we played, they would also say, oh, I think I should invite my friend because I think they'd get a real kick out of this. And so there was also some invites from people who were already enjoying the game and wanted to share it with somebody else. So it was a really slow process, but I think that because it was so intentional, I was able to find people who kind of got what the game was going to be about. To respond to the second part of the question, there's a specific playtester, Soul, shout out to Soul. Soul was playing a Metal Mentor, and we had hit a point in the game during one of our rest stops where Soul really wanted to teach the kids something new. And I realized that I didn't have an easy way for them to do that, and as a Metal Mentor, they should be able to do that. So after we finished that session, I sat down and I did some journaling about it. And that is what unlocked the whole lessons mechanic for the kid, because that was when I realized that this needed to be a foundational part of who the child is, right? The beliefs that we have about ourselves and about the world are like kind of the driving force behind everything that we do. It's what fuels all of our actions. Writing in and changing the beliefs helps us watch the child grow, and it also helps us make them feel more three-dimensional.
Wow, that's really interesting, because from reading the system, I thought that the lessons was like a core mechanic that was there early on, and then the Metal Mentor or whatever was like an archetype that was based, around like, something that like plays around with this like core concept a bit more, sort of like how the Business Beast will likely play around with more of like the social, and the Bruiser Brood is going to be more of like the physical. It's like, oh cool, something that like plays on one of the core natures of the game. But it's interesting to hear that it was the opposite, that the archetype existed first, and then a core mechanic for the actual play of the game and development of the child came afterwards. I wouldn't have expected that.
I also think it really shows that you grew the playtesting group so smartly. And I am really that was really interesting, your kind of method of cultivating a very productive but also safe playtesting group. You knew that these were people that you meshed with and that were safe people and people that you admired and you wanted their opinions, and I think that's such a beautiful and smart way to grow community.
Thank you. There's another thing that I wanted to say just to anybody who's listening who's trying to find playtesters and trying to find players. I think just in general, you need to be a GM who gives a shit. I'm gonna toot my own horn here for a second, because I think I do a pretty good job talking to my players and asking them about their life, asking them about what they're interested in, and also being willing to hold space if they do want to talk about something that's a bit more personal or vulnerable. I've had some really lovely and meaningful conversations with a number of the players that I've met because they signed up for playtesting for Protect the Child. And I also go over communication and care very regularly. Every time we have a session, we're talking about the palette grid, or we're talking about our cats. And I think that also means that my players go to bat for me just as much as I go to bat for them.
100%. The palette grid and the cat system were elements of the play that didn't really make it onto the microphone for Protect the Child, so I worry we haven't really had a chance to highlight it well enough. But I think that this game has some of the most robustly designed and implemented utilizations of existing safety tools. Are any of them original to you? Because most of them that I saw I was aware of from having prior read, but the cat system is not one I had encountered before. Is that a Mint original?
It is not. All of the safety tools that I used have been introduced to me through the Gauntlet. So for anybody who doesn't know, the Gauntlet is a gaming community. I suppose they're not called the Gauntlet anymore. Now they're now called the Open Hearth. They're a gaming community that grew into Gauntlet Publishing, and then they separated. So there's now Gauntlet Publishing and the Open Hearth gaming community. And the Open Hearth has a very robust and layered set of safety tools. They had a community podcast a couple of years ago that specifically focused on safety tools, and that did a lot of instruction for me in talking about why you need to give a shit and how to do it. And also they have some very strong core values in regards to centering marginalized players, because they understand that a marginalized player is less likely going to be acknowledged at the table. It might be harder for them to speak up. They're not trying to prevent harm, they're trying to minimize it and find ways to deal with it when it happens.
I think that is really smart, and I think especially given the nature of this game, which is you are protecting a child, which means that sometimes the child will get hurt, and there are a lot of upsetting things that come with parenting and with children, and children possibly being in like emotional harm that can be very hurtful for people. So I think it is really smart that these safety tools are centered, because kind of like what you said, it's like, you know, you can't always 100% prevent harm, but you can minimize it and you can give people the tools to talk about it.
Yeah, because the wrong response can like make things worse, but the right response can lead to like a solution.
It's an element that we generally, I find, we haven't really ever delved into safety tools on mic much, because we are in real life a group of like very locked in personal friends who have a very well developed sense of each other's like boundaries, interests, lines, veils, like the types of things where safety tools are very often the most helpful for allowing people who are newer to each other or newer to a communal space to give them the tools they need to engage with content that has the possibility for like emotionally fraught engagement, and gives them the tools to engage with that and have safety doing so. So I'm glad that we had a chance to highlight them here during the interview, because they're not tools that our context needs as much as many of the other contexts of play do. And but I don't want to minimize the necessity and import of safety tools due to their absence on our show.
So I work in theater, and a lot of theater spaces are very interested and concerned about audience safety and care. And so a lot of things will have, you know, trigger warnings, but TRPGs are a unique medium because people are bringing themselves, right? They are the actors, they are the players, so they need a way to negotiate that is elegant and straightforward, right? Forthcoming. Because, you know, you can put the trigger warnings on Protect the Child, but when you are that parent role, suddenly, you know, it's immersive, so it can kind of create that emotional feedback. So I thought your system was very elegant and detailed to show, like, hey, here's the degrees to which I feel XYZ about XYZ. You know, I think that sometimes it can be a little bit binaric, like, oh, I'm bothered by this. But then, you know, how do we engage with that in a narrative way, or avoid it entirely based on the degree in that chart, which I thought was very cool.
Well, with that, transitioning from care of individuals to care of the child is actually very, very interesting. We'd actually kind of love for you to dive a bit deeper on this, because they work asymmetrically to the player characters. They have many systems that run in parallel. Obviously, there's things like the emotional thresholds versus stress, so there is some parallel between the PCs, but we're kind of curious, what iterations in design has the child gone through, and what were some of the valuable lessons you learned as a game designer about building a game around a codified NPC?
Okay, so the first and most important lesson is that you cannot, and I repeat, you cannot let the players forget that the kid exists.
Oh, yes. Yes.
How many times have you been in a game where, like, somebody asked for a companion and you made them a companion, and then you went for an entire session forgetting that that companion exists?
2 weeks
Often.
ago.
Often.
I in one of our
Rest
home
in
games,
peace. What was his name? Bobo?
Bobo.
No.
Baba.
Baba. Rest in peace, Baba.
In another one of my home games, I asked my dungeon master for a lizard or like just like a random pet because I think all the other player characters had gotten pets, and I was like, my paladin wants one too. Sure, screw it. And then I got them. I named them Scales. They were relevant for that session, and then were brought up maybe once a month or two if I remembered that they existed. So that is totally real.
Yeah. The very first playtest of the game, the players just ended up putting the kid in a corner and expected them to behave themselves while they like were solving a more urgent problem. And I was like, well, kids don't do this, right? And if you let it happen in your game, you're completely separated from the core idea. So I had to find a way to integrate the kid into everything that happens, and that's one of the reasons why I came up with impulses. The other reason that I came up with impulses is because originally I was going to have the kid like have stats that you build up, and then they could roll to like affect the story. But The Forge in the Dark doesn't really. It's not friendly to GMs rolling. The GM should not be rolling for really anything, if they can help it. So instead, having the kid have these like impulses that they can do to just insert themselves into a situation, it made them much more dynamic, and it also recenters the story around them. And it also doubles by giving the kid agency. It's giving the kid some power over what happens next. So, for example, there was a session that I had in my Grimwoods version of the game where one of my players said, well, I'm just going to go sneak off by myself so I can, do a ritual by myself. And I was like, no, the kid can turn invisible. You can't tell if the kid is following you or not. So I'm going to make that happen if you try and do that. And so then the very next thing they had to do was just deal with the fact that the kid had witnessed something that they were not supposed to see.
So juicy.
See, it's so fun because I feel like in our actual play, we were at every point worried about where Lily was, what Lily was thinking, and what Lily was feeling. Like, she was the central plot of the game for us. I don't think there was a singular moment we ever were like, well, she's just gonna hang out by herself. Even though she is like a teen and like, could, quote unquote. That was never a thing for us though. She was quite integral to us.
That means that I've done my job.
True.
Yeah.
Very much. She really makes a huge impact on the very last episode, which was because Julie happened to just have a pair of strings, right?
Yeah, I had a couple strings left over right at the end, and like the bad guy's clock was ticked like 1 or 2 pips away from its like possible completion, but y'all's clock for escaping the facility had already filled, but I wanted to add a little more sauce to that escape. So the final version of it, and I alluded to this to you, Mint, in a message after we recorded the session. Instead of spending those strings to say, oh, their clock also fills up, which to me that just would be two clocks that are mutually exclusive filling at the same time. I had no way to resolve that. I instead spent those strings on having her act impulsively, and it involved her shooting herself up with werewolf hormones during an escape sequence and just completely shape-changing out to an absurd degree, like filling the hallway with biomass and blowing the walls out of the facility. And it was a great and terrifying moment because for a solid period of time, the party was like, oh no, like, are we all doomed actually? Is it, even though we think we've done everything we need to, is the fundamentally emotionally fragile state of this teenage girl gonna just throw it all into complete disarray? So it added some lovely, juicy, emotive tension to what could have just been, and then you make it out of the facility. Good job.
Well, yeah, and because of those strings being spent, I feel like all of our characters made it to safety at the end. It was looking a little tenuous for some of the other people, so it was very cool that at the end of our version of Lily's Angels, Lily got to execute her last moment of agency and save us, which was like such a narratively fulfilling moment for the adventure. Speaking of Lily's incredible monstrosity being displayed at the end, the different character playbooks offer players a variety of these iconic monstrous archetypes, those with fangs and claws and Chitin, whatever. However you say that one. They make me say it different every time. Tell us a little bit about how you designed these player options. Were there any particular tropes or maybe characters that you were aiming to emulate? And do you have a particular favorite that you enjoyed playing?
I've not played all of my playbooks yet because I'm still mostly the GM every time one of these games happens. I don't know if I have a favorite overall.
Mine's Business Beast, but that's because that's the only one I played.
Yeah. I don't want to make assumptions about people based off of the playbooks that they play, but I have definitely called out some of my friends based off of the choices that they've made in the past. Let's start with the inspiration, though, because I feel like that's an easier in to this question. I started with Ice Age, Star Wars Bad Batch, Tokyo Godfathers, and that one scene in Lion King 1.5 where Simba is asking Timon if he can go to the bathroom.
Wow.
Strong.
Oh my God.
Strong.
Oh, what a
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern
flashback.
are alive and well.
And have a
And
baby.
they are part of Protect the Child in the bones.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that's where I started. I've branched out to other pieces of media since then because I've just kind of been collecting them like a bird collects shiny rocks.
Yes.
But I also drew a lot from real life. So I'm not gonna name anybody obviously, but if I was to describe some of the struggles that these characters are facing, I'm pretty sure you would also be able to think of like somebody who has similar struggles, just because a lot of these problems are very human problems. So like the Hearthheart really, really wants kids. But never gets to have them, right? Like they know that they're never gonna be biologically gonna be able to have kids. And like part of that is Hana from Tokyo Godfathers, who knows that she can't be a mother, and wants a kid like desperately. But they're also like on the flip side, they could be a character who's so desperate for emotional validation that they run the risk of turning the dependent into a therapist. The Rogue Renegade has this history of being a really shitty person. There's people they've hurt. There's relationships that they're never going to be able to fix, right? There's no way to mend like the bridges that they've already burned. But they have a second chance, right? They have a chance to do it right this time. And that chance is really important. The Trick Taker never asked to be a parent. They never asked to be a caretaker. They just kind of ended up in that role by accident. And they're super unprepared for it. And they might not even want to, care about what's going on, but they have this like knack for getting on the child's level, and they're never going to be like a good solo parent. They're going to need a lot of support when it comes to parenting, but it doesn't mean that they can't add to the child's life.
I actually played the Trick Taker.
You played the Trick Taker?
Yes, I played the Trick Taker, and it was really interesting. I actually talked because I felt like, as a player, I was like, I feel so bad because I feel like Neo and Skylar's characters are so emotionally in tune with Lily, and I feel like my character's not emotionally in tune at all, but like they're always like there for them. Like I'm always making sure they have like, I don't know, like a couch to be on. And then I was like, oh wait, that's like the whole point of the archetype of like they can't be there emotionally. They're just like they're not there.
We got a lovely kind of iconographic summary of the Trick Taker in that because of the circumstances of the narrative, it wound up being that when it came time for the first rest stop, the only character of the trio whose personal residence made sense, like logistical sense, for the child to stay at was the Trick Taker's really shitty apartment. So they got to come into a space that was so obviously physically not ready for a cordial guest, let alone a child, and then that had to be the place where Lily like had as her only home base for a good several in-game days. And I loved having that wind up as the circumstance because it felt like it gave Holly as the Trick Taker an immediate expansion on that notion, because I was also a little concerned that given we were playing in something of a short format, that more touch and go relationship between the trick taker and the child. I was a little concerned we wouldn't get a chance to expound on it, but it wound up getting materially grounded in the narrative in a very immediate sense because of the home, and it was a lovely way to bring that relationship to the forefront very quickly.
I mean, all of these archetypes are very real. Like, each of these types of parents you've either seen in media, or like you can imagine meeting this person. You might have known this person, you might be this person. I think when I was reading these descriptions, I was filled with a lot of feelings as we have to consider children and the lives of children and how much we want to be involved in, foster in, right? This game is very, in that way, reflective and explores a very rich and personal, emotional space that anyone can get into and have access to, and like find an archetype that they either see themselves in or see something that they want to explore that narrative within. So I thought these were very beautiful designs.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting reading through these and not only thinking about like my own sort of relationship to parenthood in my, like, you know, nearly 30s, still full avoidance of it, in like the ways that I don't think I am ready to be a parent, maybe, you know, empathizing with the trick taker in some way or some of these others, but also looking at them and thinking like, whoa, I can see like some of my parents' flaws emulated in these, in like a way that like, yeah, in a way that was like oddly vulnerable just to like read through. But in a similarly beautiful way, I could also see like some of the strengths, like some of the things that like, you know, make them human, you know, which also kind of plays back to the whole, you can't prevent hurt. It's not about preventing bad things from coming up. It's about like learning how to address them. And each of these archetypes that has that failure, has that core mechanic that's going to give them a weakness, just as, you know, people have flaws and weaknesses that sometimes feel unavoidable. But by balancing those out with effort, with your strength, with intentionality, with empathy, you can get to a point where, sure, you may still have those pitfalls, but at least there are tools to address them. And the way that the archetypes kind of emulate reality in a way was super surreal, because I can definitely see the inspiration not just from, you know, popular media, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, parenting, whatever, but also from the real life.
Let the record show that when you mentioned that it allowed you to see some of the vulnerabilities in your own parents, I teared up a little bit because that was definitely one of the reasons why I wrote some of those playbooks.
Yeah, there's like a weird thing, right? I feel like, especially as I'm turning 29 this month, and I've been on this train for a while now, thankfully, but it is like a weird feeling kind of starting to, maybe this is just my own experience, but kind of starting to hit your 20s, you know, maybe even a little earlier than that for some people, but having the realization that like your parents are real people too. Like there's this blindness of authority that I feel, you know, you have as a kid, where it's like, these are the people who raise me and who care for me and I love them very much. Or, you know, maybe you have conflict with them or whatever your relationship might be. But there is like a wall of authority, you know, there's a certain, you know, maybe to go back to there's a mask you have to wear as a parent, because you know, you can't be their best friend. You obviously want to be their friend, but you're their family, you're their protector, you're their provider, because there are fundamental roles and challenges that you have to meet to care for another human being. There is a part of yourself you have to sacrifice that, you know, your child probably will never know or won't know for a long time. And coming, you know, into my own adulthood and realizing that my parents are those same complicated people, that they hid things from me for better or for worse in attempts to protect me, that they did things whether I agreed with them or whether they were for the best because they just thought it was best and they were just kind of making a guess, you know, doing it the best that they could, whether or not that was actually successful. Yeah. It's a really interesting, you know, kind of relationship and realization to have as an adult. And so I really liked getting to see that reflected in, you know, the mechanics and the writing that this game addresses.
It harkens to the weaknesses that you've written for those characters, which you mentioned earlier being something you spent a lot of time doing and a lot of intentionality for. Because codifying those flaws that we understand by reflecting on our own lives into a mechanic is really great ludonarrative creation.
It makes me think a little about one of the areas in which tabletop role-playing games and, say, video games are most often different is there is a notion in tabletop, for the most part, and this changes occasionally, but broadly it is true, that you only get one go at everything. You don't get to try the level over and over again until you know how to beat it, right? You get one go, and in your trad games, if you fuck it up, it's a TPK and everyone's character is dead now, right? And it's that kind of differential that reflects back then onto parenting. Sky, you were talking about the kind of emergent problem solving and creative versatility and vulnerability that your parents and everyone's parents has to demonstrate when raising a child, because everyone who raises a child, the first child they raise is the first child they raise, and it's a whole person, and you don't get to go back and try it again and refine, and all you can do is refine as you go and address the harm you've done. You don't get to stop that harm from occurring. You can't perfect it.
I think this leads into a question that I wanted to ask all of you.
Oh, great.
Protect the Child is still in playtest. I'm still accepting feedback. And one of, I think, the most valuable pieces of feedback that I would be able to get is to ask Julie specifically, and then the group broadly, what was the experience of role-playing a child like for you? And did the game provoke an emotional response in you or in the play group as a whole? And if so, what kind of emotional response did it provoke?
You, Mint, and the audience at home will need to allow some patience for me if I do tear up a little myself during this section. It was humongously emotionally impactful. This, I don't think I've had a game on the show yet that has drawn from me the level of emotionality that Protect the Child has in moments when it has. I wasn't gutturally sobbing the whole playthrough, but I teared up on mic multiple times during the course of the 4 episodes. Portraying Lily was a very visceral experience for me. Myself, of course, a transgender woman, and I'm in my late 20s now, and I had, when I was Lily's age, only the lightest, earliest, faintest burgeonings of the ideas that would later crystallize into my womanhood. Really only in college did I start to really kind of discover myself in ways that I had words for in that way. Lily personified so many of the same fears and anxieties of the earliest days of my transition, the doubt, the sense of failed performance, so many of these things that so many young trans people and seeing it specifically through the lens of a young trans woman, everyone goes through these in some flavor when they transition, and getting to embody that and kind of explore that space again for a second time in a second context. Sometimes you do get to take a second go at things, was deeply resonant for me. There's a moment in one of the episodes where the party helps Lily get some clothes from an outlet, a retail outlet, and they do a whole big to-do of one of the a shape changer in the party takes on the form of a retail assistant to seem really supportive and like someone who sees Lily out in public and sees her as a girl and gives her that support and gives her a trusting adult figure who isn't one of the monsters that she's currently staying with. And she sees right through it when it happens. And it very naturally grew into kind of an analog feeling to that moment when you're like a newly out trans person and you're talking to like supportive cis people who like are giving you that big smile and they're like, yo, I totally like see you as a woman. And it's like, I know you don't. I know you don't because I know that I don't. And I know more about gender than you do. And I know you're performing for me. And it kind of broke my heart a little to be in that moment. And it very naturally led to the conclusion of that scene was Lily went home and had all these extra clothes and new skirts and dresses and jeans and all that, and went into the bathroom by herself, tried them on, came back out wearing the same hoodie she had gone to the outlet in and said, I just look like a boy in a dress. And I remember that feeling. Like, I remember the first time I felt that. I remember saying those words when I was younger. And I cried. I cried a lot during that episode. I don't know the degree to which it'll be clear on the recording, but it was a deeply emotional experience for me in ways that are born both out of the mechanics of the game and out of kind of circumstantial realities like that, right? What you, Mint, created was you created a scenario where a young trans girl, already in a situation of fundamental precarity by being like a trans youth in a conservative town, was put into like a heightened degree of precarity because of like this monstrous outburst she has, the monstrous caretakers who take her in. And through that, a scenario was engineered that through no element of the scenario itself. There's nothing in the Lily Quick Start guide that says there will be a scene where you take her shopping and she gets overwhelmed by the idea of like faux cisgender supportiveness, right? That's too narrow. It wouldn't make sense to include such a thing in the playbook. It's not how the game is structured, and it'd be too prescriptive. But it emerged so naturally from the overlapping incentives of the players and their characters and the needs of the child that were born out of the stressors she endured early on in the game, that it just like I just felt gutted in a really fruitful way. Like, it was very emotional and very harrowing, but it was an emotionally harrowing space that I was enthusiastic to engage with. And I remember at the end of that recording session, Neo gave me a really big hug and tucked me in and got me everything I needed and checked in with me, and he asked if I was doing okay, and I said I'm doing great because I'm not there anymore. And I don't think I had really perceived how far I had come until I was given a reason to choose to step back into that space, to step back into that moment in my life where that was my precarity, that was my fragility. And getting to see the ways that I've grown since then, I felt this huge warmth like spread all through me. So to answer your yes or no question of did it evoke an emotional response in me, the answer to that question is yes.
Well, first I just want to say, Julie, beautiful. I mean, I was there to witness it, but I think you really crystallized the experience at the table, and I'm guessing what a lot of people are going to feel listening to this. And I think that really shows the beauty of this game and really putting yourself, I'm sure, as the game runner and in the role of the child, but then also like for me as a player. So like I have a recurring nightmare that I have a pet that I've forgotten about. Like
I have that dream too.
Really? Oh my god. Yeah, so we have
pets.
It's always been so we have a chameleon that kind of got like hoisted onto me. It's a whole story. And I have a recurring nightmare that I look in her cage and there's a second chameleon that I just never knew about.
And I'm apparently like, very unhelpful in every time.
Yes, and I'm like, oh my god. And so you can only imagine how I feel playing a game in which there is a child hosted upon me. But it is like it's this emotional thing 'cause this whole time I'm just like so worried about this kid, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want good things to happen for this kid, and it's nerve-wracking, and sometimes things are just out of your control. And the thing is that when the rest times you can only do like a certain amount of things, but there's so many things you want to do, and I feel like that's just like parenthood. And in the last episode, when I thought not only Lily was in danger, I thought the other characters were in danger, and that was very emotional because by the end of even just 4 episodes, which is about like 5 hours of play, we were a little family. And that was very worrying to me, that this game could end with one less parent, and that then the child would have to feel the loss of this of a parent. That would be so awful. And I think to piggyback off of Julie a little bit, I think there is also, especially in this playbook, in Lily's playbook, of you kind of feel like that friend, that bystander, that person of like you want to support this person, but there's like nothing right to say, because it is a journey. And there was something really cool and freeing, that because at the end of episode 3 we get her on HRT, but then we're like, well, we're playing in like a fun fantasy zone. No, let's raid Exocorp and get her like real
Wolf
cool
hormones.
shape.
Super HRT for werewolves.
Yeah, I don't know,
Werewolf.
something about it. You give a shapeshifter girl regular speed hormones, and she's like, I don't know, it just isn't hitting quite right.
And it was a really cool moment that is my favorite about TTRPGs, is when your character can do something that you in real life cannot do. And I think that was like the final push when we decided, no, we're gonna do 4 episodes instead of 3, was no, we're gonna go one above for this child. Like, she means that much to us.
I love that.
On a kind of similar note, where I feel my emotional response to the game kind of manifested, was I originally set out to play the Business Beast, and as the Business Beast, I made Oscar Hayes, who is a living shadow. The pun that I ended up coming for is he's a literal shady salesman. He fucking sucks, he talks like this. You listen to him and immediately you're like, I cannot trust this guy. This dude's gonna do terrible things to me, and I am. If it's up to me, I'm gonna profit, and if you profit, it's not such a big deal to me. But the problem was, we already had one very aloof, didn't super care about the child parent in the Trick Taker, who's trying to be as emotionally back as possible. And then we had one very active, kind of a parent in the Bruiser Brute, who's, I think Neo's character took the most kind of spearheading of looking out for, checking in on, and doing all this stuff for the child. And I originally meant to be more aloof, like, whatever, kid, you'll get over it, or, more like, kind of like assholey, and then have those moments where I break down because the child asks me something. But then partially because I'm just like, non-combative as a person, and I feel like just a very goofy goober, positive, chill vibes kind of guy in real life, and also partly because I cared so deeply for Lily, I feel like Oscar Hayes is actually going to come across as incredibly helpful and genuine the entire playthrough. So he's actually very concerned, and at every moment it's like, yeah, let me use my shadow magic. Come on, gang.
He's our Grunkle Stan.
Yeah, so my kind of emotional response to it was I ended up making a much more pleasant character than I originally intended to, because I was just that endeared to Lily.
I just want to interject and say that there is one specific person who's going to be very happy about this, because kind of the joke in the playtest server is that the Business Beast is always the worst kind of asshole. All of the worst things have been done by the Business Beast, and there's one person, my good friend Luca, who is helping me with like the visual identity of the game. Shout out to Luca. my friend Luca says, no, the business beast can just be kind of a pathetic kind of guy who, he's just bad at this, but he means well. And so the fact that there's one other person out there who's, portraying a more sympathetic business beast is going to make him very happy.
Happy to fill the role,
It just speaks to the different kinds of ways we can interpret these archetypes, right? You can have, a shady business guy who, had a lot of money but never really had any time, and oh my god, there's a kid, well, I've got all this money, what the hell? You know what I mean? Like, there's different opportunities. I played the Bruiser Brute, and I picked that archetype very specifically. When I read the description, it said, this is for the person who is afraid to harm their child, After reading all of the descriptions, I immediately knew that that was the character I wanted to portray. But I did have a lot of emotional intensity around their weakness, which was that if you display physical strength around the child, it can damage trust. On a low succeeding roll, you can scare the child and lose trust, which felt a little punishing, right? You pick this class because you want to embody that I can be a protector, right? My strength can be used to protect and not harm. So with that weakness present, it sort of put it on a bit of a precipice of danger, which, if you are violent, you do embody that precipice of danger. But I later, upon re-examining the rules, it also mitigates that with if you successfully protect the child, literally, you gain trust, and you can gain experience through that, and you can, gain character acceleration through that. So that made me feel a bit level, but I found that I was surprised by my emotional reaction to a rule that's never really happened before.
And it felt very ludo-narratively harmonious, because in much the same way that you, the player, were encountering your first exposure to this rule, the weakness of the Bruiser Brute, the character, in turn, was having their first exposure to a circumstance where they have to put a mitigation on what would be their standard mode of agency, right? This is someone who ordinarily had been kind of a stern, workmanly, warehouse, ex-gang member type person who didn't really have reasons to have qualms about violence, at least on a broad level. And it brought you and the character very much into a harmonious position with one another, I find, because your player level fear of that weakness perfectly emulated the character's fear of that possibility occurring. And it led to, instead of your character always using force and always using brute strength and violence to solve his problems, it was a thing where only in moments where the only way out was through, when the only thing that could be done to protect the child was to wolf out and engage in that physical harm, you, the player, and the character in harmony had to make the calculated risk of oh god, this could hurt my trust with the child, and I have to try anyway, because it's the only way. It's the only way I know how to solve this right now under the pressure and the duress that I am, which I think it loops so perfectly back to what you had said earlier, Skylar, about parents making these compromised choices because every time they're doing something is often the first time they're doing something, and it's making these gambles with fate and with the world that the approach you take won't have some huge and horrible impact on the child you are in theory trying to protect. So it was, I agree, very fraught, and it was very emotionally heavy. That weakness, I think more than any of the weaknesses, that was the one that I think most informed play during the scope of what we had at the table. Again, only 4 or 5 hours of total gameplay, so not all of them really got to really get their claws into their weaknesses very often, but especially getting into conversations with you in between episodes, Neo, I found that was really where you were consistently coming back to, was this heightened sense of fear and aversion built around the weakness, and then how that informed your character choices, which I found was very rich.
Yeah, and like how you experience this really intense emotional reaction from portraying Lily, you know, one of the takeaways I have is that even though the experience was emotionally fraught, it was still very fruitful and worth experiencing. Even though it gave me a lot of anxiety between episodes, and really made me reflect, which is really impactful. It's very impactful.
Well, damn, Mint, you kind of flipped the script on us. I think this is the first time in one of these interviews that we've actually had questions kind of reflected back and thrown at us. I hope this was helpful. What are your thoughts given our responses? Was this helpful? Do you feel like it's in line with sort of your mission statement, with what you're trying to achieve in regards to your, like, you know, emotional response from Protect the Child? Has any of this kind of resonated with you?
This is an incredibly affirming experience for me.
Hooray!
Because this is a game where I've kind of placed the entirety of what I had up to this point into Julie's hands, and I said, here's what I did. I hope that it resonates with you. And it did. It
really
all of
did.
you seemed to you picked up on a lot of the notes that I had very carefully tried to weave into the game. So I have an essay about this on my Tumblr. I wrote about this a few weeks ago, where I talk about the conventions of genre and some of the work you can do to make sure you can talk about fraught topics without letting the game kind of get away from you. And one of the things that I was talking about in that essay was the reason that I wrote this game. And the reason that I wrote this game is because I know too many kids that I personally knew when I was a kid who had unhappy endings. And this is a chance for me to kind of give those kids their own happy endings in their own way, and giving a group of people a chance to kind of rally around this version of a kid, fictional, but maybe inspired by somebody that you know or inspired by yourself, and give them the happy ending that they deserve. It's meant to be a little bit of a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that's incredibly personal.
I think it comes through completely in the way that you've written this game. It was a deeply fulfilling and rewarding experience to play Protect the Child, Mint, and I want to thank you again for reaching out to us and asking if this would be our next partnered game. This has been I've shed tears and many words and thoughts already about all the interest and emotion that this game has engendered in me, and those words and possibly tears shall continue. We are coming to the end of our interview here, at least for our public-facing interview. But this is the opportunity for those of you who are subscribed to us on the micro tier on our Patreon. Please join us for part 2 of this interview. We have only gone through half of the questions that we intend to ask Mint, and only half of the questions that Mint intends to ask us, if my notes are to be believed. Mint, I want to give you a humongous and full-hearted thank you for joining us here on the interview and for offering up to us this game. It was a deeply rewarding experience. I think you've got something really, truly special here. To everybody listening at home, please go mint-rabbit.itch.io and pick up the brand new, just dropped as of like day before day of recording, so about a month ago when you're hearing this, Playtest 1.6 is now available, now with fully printable character sheets, some updates to a variety of systems throughout the game. If you had any sort of enjoyment during your listen through of Protect the Child, I really do urge you to drop Mint a few bucks, pick up the playtest for yourself, join the server, get involved in the conversation, and give it a play. I think you'll find some really, really rewarding experiences there. Mint, thank you so much for joining us.
Before we sign off, any shout outs, anything you want to give some attention to here in the spotlight before we give a little send off?
Sure. So, I want to say everybody should check out the work of Luca Brave, also known as Psychound Games. Luca is one of the people who's been with me for almost every step of the way for Protect the Child, and has helped me find a bit of a visual identity to the game.
Nice.
I also want to shout out Thy Dungeon Gal, who got me connected with the four of you.
What about
And he was actually...
Kiki, my
Yeah,
goat.
the Thy Dungeon Gal is actually one of the original 9 people that I messaged
Wow.
to ask if they
Wow.
would like to play.
And she's one of our original Patreon members.
We love her.
Yeah, she's a real one.
True.
If you want to know if there's a TTRPG that does this thing that you want it to do, you can ask me occasionally on there's a TTRPG for that.tumblr.com. I periodically open my inbox up for requests, and I usually try to respond with 4 to 8 games that hit 1 or 2 of the notes that you're trying to hit in your roleplay experience.
Impressive.
That's a lot. Well, Mint, it was amazing to have you on. And like we said earlier, we will be having another episode on our Patreon for our part 2. And everyone get excited because we have another community game coming up next, which will be Clutch. We're super excited to play. Thank you to everyone who helped vote. We love the community. So also thank you to Mint for highlighting games as well. And with that, 1, 2, 3, parenting!
Bye-bye, y'all.
Thanks for listening.
Hi, and thank you for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then we'd really appreciate if you left us a review. If you really like what we do here and want to support us further, you can join us at patreon.com/tinytablepodcast. Our business email is also open for inquiries at tinytablebusiness@gmail.com, and all of our socials can be found in the episode description for any shenanigans you might want to follow. Till next time, see ya!